Okay. Hi, everyone. We're still obviously trying to figure out how the technology works on Facebook Live. Do I see you? I don't really see any view, so I can't
I
see
think
your
with
comments.
webinar, okay, yeah.
So we will get better at this, I promise everyone. But happy new year to all of you who are joining us. This is obviously our first Facebook Live. But for those of you who are new, I'm Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Robert Perry, the founder of the Circle and editor of the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles. Robert and I wanted to host this New Year's Live because we know that New Year's is a time where so many of us want to recommit to our spiritual practice. But as course students, we often don't know that the course has some advice for us on what to do in the new year. It even gives us a resolution, which we are going to talk about shortly. And I am going to turn that off because that's better. But before we jump into the content here, and while we're still waiting on people to join, I'll just say that we recognize that many of you, some of you may be new to the Circle or maybe new to the complete edition of A Course in Miracles. So as a very brief overview, the Circle of Atonement is a nonprofit. We were founded in 1993, and we are dedicated to sharing the wisdom of the Course with the world. And in fact, it was New Year's Eve of 1975 when Jesus told Helen Schuckman that the Course would grow from infancy into a helper of the world, and that it would go from the paper on which it was printed into the hearts for which it was intended. And here at the Circle, our purpose is to help it do just that. And right now, the biggest way that we do that is, as I mentioned, by publishing the complete and annotated edition of the course. This is the version of the course that Robert and the team at the Circle spent 12 years putting together. And what makes the complete edition unique is that it has 45,000 words of restored text from Helen Schuckman's original notebooks. It has footnotes throughout that clarify difficult passages, and it has 33 cameo essays in the back that teach you how to apply course teachings to your everyday life. And so if you don't have a copy of the complete and annotated edition of the course, you can find it on Amazon, and you can also order on our site at CircleofA.org. So I think that's it for the housekeeping. Welcome once again to all of you who have joined us, for those of you who are coming in. Robert, are you ready to talk about the new year?
I am, yes.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, this is obviously a time where we like to set resolutions around what we want for the year ahead. But oftentimes, as you and I have been discussing, those resolutions are pretty ego-based. And I am just as guilty here as anyone of making resolutions around trying to eat better or trying to work out, have more income, that kind of thing. But from a course perspective, the commitment that we should be making here at the beginning of the year is dedicating it to God. And so in our Facebook Live, we're going to talk about 4 ways to do that, right?
Right. Right. So briefly, the 4 ways, or well, they're kind of 4 themes around doing that. So those themes are new beginnings, giving units of time to God, the course's New Year's resolution, and try again.
Right. So you
So
want to start with new beginnings?
yeah, let's start there. So new beginnings is a really important theme in the course. The course is very much into the concept of new beginnings. It speaks of us being reborn. It mentions rebirth many times. It even talks about us being born again. And there's a quote that says, rebirth is man's inheritance. So it sees this kind of as a right that we all have, the right to be reborn.
Yeah, and this is obviously a major theme in our lives, especially at this time of year. We all want the new year to bring that new beginning, and yet what we tend to do is get really excited at the beginning of the year and then in short order fall back into the same old patterns. So how is the course recommending that we get to these new beginnings?
Well, new beginnings, you're right. They do seem so elusive. And so the course's approach is that it's about stepping out of our own past patterns into new ones. But what the course contributes to that concept is that we have the freedom to do that because the past is truly over. There's a quote that I love about that in the text that says, whenever we move from one instant to the next, the previous one no longer exists. I love that concept because what it means is all that baggage that we carry, all those past patterns, in fact, they no longer exist. We only bring them into the present if we choose to bring them there because, in fact, they're non existent. And what that means is we have a free choice in the present. And the Course does believe in free will, which means that there's nothing that determines our choices in truth but us. We determine them in the moment we make them. And so in this moment, we can make a new choice free of the past.
And we're really good at bringing the past into the present, aren't we? I mean, I think that's one of the things that keeps us so stuck in our spiritual growth and in our relationships and whatnot. Like we live in the past so much. And that's one of the things that is so inspiring about the new year is, as you're saying, it just gives us that focus on new beginnings and starting afresh.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much we stay stuck in the same exact patterns. I
That make
remember,
us sick and tired, right? Like
yeah,
we're tired of
yeah,
ourselves, and yet we still can't quite get over the wounds and the suffering and the hurt,
mistakes.
the mistakes, our own mistakes, how we've been hurt, all of it. Like we just carry that with us, like Jacob Marley's chains, yeah, throughout our lives.
It's true, but at the same time, this teaching on new beginnings emphasizes that we have the capacity to step out of the past and make a new choice. That capacity can't be taken from us. And we do see ourselves exercising it at times, and things change.
Yeah, that's true. And we'll go into more of that as we go along. But the just moving through our points, the next idea is giving units of time to God. And the course talks about this in a number of different ways. It talks about giving the day to God, which we can do through obviously our meditation practices and our hourly practices and whatnot throughout the day. But I think we're all pretty familiar with those as students of the course, but the course also talks about giving all of the circumstances and the situations in our lives to the goal of truth. So, what does it mean by that?
Well, there's a section on that called Setting the Goal in chapter 17, the text. And basically, it says what you should do at the beginning of every situation is just dedicate that situation to the goal of truth. And then, if you can hold that goal in mind, you will look for the things that help you achieve the goal, and you'll tend to ignore the things that aren't of any use in achieving the goal. But the point is that just as we're supposed to give the day to God, and which really means the goal of God, so we're supposed to give situations to that same goal.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, of course, the big thing is giving the year. And that's the most pertinent for our discussion, giving the year to God. And this is a surprisingly prevalent theme in the course. It took me a long time to spot it, but once you spot it, it's remarkably uh, frequently mentioned, and I'll just go through that. The new year is mentioned several times in the text at the end of chapter 15 and the first couple of sections of chapter 16, and that was because Helen and Bill were receiving that material at the time in which 1967 was the new year. Uh, Also, the workbook is based on the idea of devoting a year to God. It doesn't say that in the beginning. Okay, the workbook is really trying to not, scare you off in the beginning. But as it reaches the end, there are a few mentions that we've dedicated this year, we've given this year to God, and given it just by doing all those workbook exercises. And then interestingly, that very bit of guidance that you mentioned at the beginning about, from the paper on which was written into the hearts for which was intended, that was taken down on the last day of 1975. And so it talks about the new year, and it opens up by saying this year will be different. So there
Yeah.
is this whole teaching in the course about the new year.
Yeah, and as I said before, I think that's a surprise to course students how the new year is mentioned. And once again, that Jesus even offers a resolution for us that we'll be getting into. But I love this language, this year will be different. And he even emphasizes the will, like he just has such conviction around the idea that this year will be different. We can make it different. And again, as I mentioned in the introduction, this idea of making every year different is such a major theme in our lives. Every year that new year comes around, we think about how are we going to make this year different? And so, what does the course say about how we can actually get there this time?
Well, I think there are different ways to approach that, but the way we're talking about here, of course, is actually dedicating the year to God. And we can talk more about what that entails, but I think that in itself is different.
Yeah, and it also goes up against something we talk so often about here, which is our need to control. So when we say that one way to make this year different is by dedicating it to God, well, that bumps up against that thing in us that says, no, thanks, I know best. I want to decide what's best for me, and I want to make my own resolutions for myself. I'm going to decide that I'm going to lose more weight, stop drinking, make more money, etc. And when we're left in control, I think that's why our resolutions tend to be so self-focused. We have so much focus on the body and not our spiritual growth and our evolution, right?
Right. And with those kind of superficial goals, even when we achieve them, how much is really different?
Well, not much because we tend to look the same every
Yeah,
year.
right. Way the same. Right.
Right.
And you can see how different the course's approach to the new year and to, and how different it is to dedicate it to God, when at one point Jesus says, make this year different by making it all the same. And the idea of making the year all the same, and presumably that means it's a year in which you stop bouncing back and forth between your ego and the Holy Spirit in you, so that everything's constantly volatile because you're swinging back and forth between those two poles. It's a year in which your dedication is just on the one thing, and so in a sense it's all the same. The idea of wanting to make the year all the same shows that we're talking about a loftier goal here than our usual goals.
Yeah, and we hear that quote a lot. At least we talk about it a lot here at the circle. Like, make this year different by making it the same. And the idea is to make the year different by making the same choice for truth, right?
I think so. It's not elaborated on, but I think that would be a safe guess with the course, right? Because there's so much in the course about how we are split between two fundamentally different views of reality, two fundamentally different goals, ways of living. And so we're constantly bouncing back and forth. And it's probably about that. It's probably about being single minded in our dedication and focus.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful idea because the ego would have us making all kinds of different choices based on how we feel in any given moment. And it's nice to know that we can make this year different by making the same choice for God and for truth and for love whenever there is a choice to be made. That's just an amazing idea.
Well, that actually reminds me of that section, setting the goal, that I mentioned a little bit ago. It talks about how we can set this goal of truth at the very beginning, and then the situation, what it means to us, is determined by that goal. And then it contrasts that with the ego's approach, where it's just kind of like bopping around, pursuing different things at different times. And it doesn't have a single-minded focus.
Right. Think about that in terms of pulling that idea into your practice. So if your day is dedicated to the goal of truth, then every decision that you have to make about, am I going to do this thing or do that thing or say this thing or whatnot, like you can get rid of all of that. You can probably avoid a lot of mistakes. You can probably keep yourself more centered by just dedicating the day to the goal of love, truth, kindness, God, etc. And I don't know, I find myself really moved by that today.
Well, I think there's a lot of pain and anxiety and uncertainty that is entailed in keeping our options on that fundamental level open. Like,
Mm-hmm.
am I going to go with the ego or with God? I want to stay open and spontaneous. I think keeping those options open entails so much mess in our lives and our minds.
Yeah, and sorry to park us here more than probably I should, but if you think about going into a conversation with someone and you and that other person say, through this conversation, I'm thinking specifically of conversations that can be difficult or contentious, we are going to dedicate it to the goal of truth. And what that means is we're not going to dedicate it to the goal of our ego, to the goal of winning. We're going to hold ourselves accountable to something higher than that. And how would our conversations and thereby our relationships be different if we could actually do that?
Yeah. And as I think the Course says that just one person doing that has a power that can draw both of them into that kind of a mindset.
Yeah, but it also says who's ever saner at the time, and we do tend to argue over who's saner in those moments.
Yeah. Although if you're arguing about it, you're probably not very sane.
Good point. All right, well, just moving us along here. The third point that we are talking about today is the idea that Jesus has a resolution that he wants us to make with him. And I know I've been sort of teasing that out a bit up until now. And you can find it in chapter 16, section 2, the power of holiness. At least that's where it's found in the CE. And what it says is, today, let us resolve together to accept the joyful tidings that disaster is not real and that reality is not disaster. And so we're going to unpack this a little bit, but this resolution has always been incredibly important to me because it's a reminder of the fact that we can choose what we want to see in the world. We can put our faith in the disasters that we have made, or we can put our faith in the reality that God has created. So let's talk about this a bit because there's some good stuff here that I think students aren't familiar with.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realize he was talking about a New Year's resolution. And the
Mm-hmm.
backdrop is that Helen Schuckman and Bill Thetford, the scribes of A Course in Miracles, they had, through the events that gave birth to the Course, they had experienced something very new coming into their lives. And yet they still had all of their old stuff. And so the section, you could say, basically sets before us a choice of deciding what is most real in our lives. And the way that I think of the two choices based in that section is that the first choice is what he calls the disaster you have made. And I think we get what that means. It's just all our past mistakes and all the mess they've created, which we seem to be living within.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the second option is what I'll call God's presence in our lives. And what this section talks about this in terms of is all the witnesses to his love that have shown up in our lives. And Helen and Bill were experiencing so many witnesses, so many things that happened both inside them and in their lives that seemed to be, basically witnesses bits of evidence of God's love. So Helen was hearing this inner voice, giving her this, amazing wisdom. She had been, through the influence of that voice within her, she'd been prompted to be a source of helpfulness to a great many people. She had apparently really inspired counsel for people that she didn't follow herself, but that helped other people. She had had all kinds of remarkable experiences, experiences of oneness with God. Uh, and you can extend this, like when you think about witnesses to God's love in your life, it's anything that happens inside or outside that speaks of a higher presence, a higher reality, that maybe even says to you by implication that there's a God who cares about you and is aware of you. Um, and the list of those witnesses, I think for most of us, is actually quite long.
Yeah, we have witnesses in guidance, our own personal experiences of guidance,
Right.
people that are sent into our lives. I'm sure we could all have stories of that person who just showed up at the moment that you needed them. And
And we knew they were guided.
we know they were guided and that they were the witness for God's love in our life. What other examples can you think of along that line of witnesses for God's love?
Well, I think there's just an endless list. One is people who haven't just shown up, but people who in some way are a source of helpfulness for us.
Hmm.
And maybe they feel tapped on the shoulder to be that. Meditative experiences that we may have, what the Course calls holy instants. Helen had a bunch of exalted, inspired dreams that seemed like more than the usual kind of, rehash of the day that dreams so typically are. The things shifting in our mind. This section talks about them learning new lessons that were alien to their former, kind of thought structure.
Hmm.
So anyway, the list could
So
go on.
all kinds of witnesses to God's love in life. And like Helen, oftentimes we tend to put our faith in the first category, which is the disasters of our life, and not in the second category. We tend to marginalize the second category of God's witnesses to our love. And Helen was great at that. And she had so many witnesses to God's love in her life, including obviously being able to converse with Jesus, but she didn't believe them. She put her faith in other things, and I'm just reminded of the section we just completed here in the text. In fact, the last section of the text, and it's the choose once again section, where it says we our temptation in all of its forms is to see ourselves as a body born in what must die, unable to escape its frailty, and bound by what it orders us to feel. And when I think about my own experience of putting faith in the disasters that I've made, and Helen's experience is an echo of this as well, like we have more faith in what we feel the body makes us feel, what the body binds us to feel. And so constantly we're putting our faith in what this frail little thing does and what it can do. And by doing that, we're missing this much larger opportunity to put our faith in God himself. And I love this idea of his witnesses, because here he is demonstrating his love for us in all these different ways, whether it's people who show up or guidance that shows up or lessons that we learn or spiritual experiences. And I mean, Helen, again, was an example of that she had the height of spiritual experiences and still chose to put her faith in the frailty of the body most of the time. I mean, she
Right.
did have moments of the other, but we do this, right? Like, where are we putting our faith?
Yeah, and she's an extreme case, but I see the same thing, with people in general. Uh, and I think it's interesting to say that what's being asked of us is not blind faith. Like just have faith in God because he's God. He deserves your faith, give it. Um, it's it's acknowledging the evidence in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just like Helen, she knew that evidence was real. And yet she would turn away from it and dismiss it and find reasons to be skeptical about it. I've seen all kinds of examples in my own life and the lives of others where when something happens, it's of God. And yet your mind starts chewing on it then and poking holes in it. And by the time you're done, it may just, fall by the wayside, even though something in you still knows.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you pointed that out because that feels very familiar where you have something that happens and there's something in you that knows it's extraordinary, whether it's a powerful guidance experience or again, the person shows up or whatever. And then the doubt creeps in. And by the time the doubt has its way with us, we think, well, that was just a coincidence. That couldn't have been of God. When in fact, it most likely was.
Yeah, yeah. And I've got some great stories about that we don't have time for. But one of the things the Course itself points out, and in this along these same lines, is we can do an act of love in which we're, being giving towards somebody else. And in the moment, it feels pure and it feels good. And then once this happened and the glow has started to wear off a bit, our ego says, well, hang on there. While you're patting yourself on the back, could it be that your motives were way more self-serving than you were telling yourself? And as its voice starts speaking to you, you think, yeah, maybe that was just all about me serving myself and my ego, when in fact, it was genuine and it was real. And so you might even say that's another one of those witnesses to God's love that we find a way to unravel and dismiss.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad that you pointed that out too, because often we've been talking up to this point about witnesses being things that show up in our lives. And I'm glad that you mentioned the ways in which we can be a witness for God's love in the lives of others.
And that's probably the main thing he has in mind in this section, that
Mhm.
Helen had been a channel of blessings to others.
Hmm.
And that was the witnesses.
That's an amazing thing to think about, that God actually sends witnesses of his love into our lives while also giving us the charge to go out and be witnesses to his love in the lives of others. It's a beautiful cycle.
Right. And those second witnesses are still witnesses of his love for us.
Yeah. But just getting back to the resolution that Jesus asked us to make, that to put our faith in reality and not disasters that we've made. What I love about that is the way in which he asks us to make that resolution with him. He asks us to do so much with him, to hold his hand throughout this journey. At one point, he talks about meditating with Helen. And I love, again, how Jesus is always asking us to do these things with him. And maybe we would be better at keeping our resolutions if we understood that he was
Oh,
there for us and that we could make the commitment not only for ourselves to do better, but make a commitment to him because he's
or
right there with us.
well, yeah. I mean, if you want to make a commitment stronger, sometimes you'll ask somebody to join you in it,
Right. Like Jesus
right?
is the ultimate accountability partner for us.
Right. Right. It does strengthen. I mean, our resolve by ourselves can be pretty weak and shaky. It helps to make a resolution with somebody, especially somebody like Jesus.
Yeah. Because he's never going to let us down. Um, yeah. And that's a beautiful idea, too, to think that Jesus can be your accountability partner for your New Year's
Yeah.
resolution.
Yeah, I like that. I hadn't really thought in those terms, even though he says, let us resolve together.
Hmm. So, again, that could be a way to help us to keep our New Year's resolutions that we often don't keep, to the point where some of us have even given up on making them altogether. So, what else does the course have to say about helping us in the new year?
Well, in terms of the despair over, like, you know, Why make them when I'm not going to keep them? That brings us to our fourth point, which is try again. And that exact phrase, try again, is actually found many times in the course.
Yeah, and I mentioned our last section that we read, which is the last section of the text itself. It says choose once again. So we're pretty familiar as course students with the phrase choose again, but not try again. And I feel like those are the same things, but you make a distinction between them. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, they're in essence the same thing with just a little bit of different nuance, but the quotes are different, right? The words choose again are different than try again.
Well, it's just funny because you get really excited about try again. And I'm like, well, it's choose again. And it's kind of the same thing. And you're like, no, try is different. And I'm like, well, not really, but
Well, it's not really different, but for instance, in spiritual circles, there tends to be a lot of frowning on trying. It's like you're efforting, right? Don't try. You're
oh,
efforting.
it's the
Just be
Yoda
willing.
thing. Do
Yeah,
do
there
or
is
do
no
not.
try.
There is
Right.
no try.
Yeah, thank you, Yoda, for that. Um, anyway, the course is really into trying, and it's really into trying again. The course says that exact phrase, try again, uh, 12 times. There's a couple extra times in the CE. And what I love about try again, I mean, it's such a common, simple sentiment, but there's some wisdom in it. Because basically, what it says is that, okay, you may have failed umpteen times in the past, but no matter how many times you failed, that's the past, right? In this moment, you can just pick yourself up and put the past behind you and try again. Nothing constrains you from making a new choice, a new effort right now.
Yeah, and that's what makes Jesus a cool accountability partner. But again, we have just come off this section, everybody. So that's why I'm like continuing to refer back to it. But that choose once again section, one thing that struck me about it when we went over it in our course companions class this week is that the attitude with which we're supposed to approach trying and choosing again, the whole idea that trials are but lessons presented once again so that we have a chance to learn, and the way that you and I've been talking about this, that the way in which we tend to approach trials coming towards us again is, oh my God, here it is again. And the way that the course is asking us to approach it is, oh my God, here it is again. And I
Right.
can learn. And so that feels to me like another important attitude to take into the new year, that it's not only that we can try again, it's that we should be enthusiastic and optimistic about the fact that we can try again because it gives us another opportunity to learn. And if we learn, that trial might not be presented to us again.
Right. And even if we don't learn, we'll keep getting more opportunities. So the fact that we're faced with having to try again is not bad. It's a good thing. And we'll keep having the opportunity to try again until we succeed.
Yeah. And I love that quote from Jesus where he says, um, there'll never be a time when I do not wish to try again. You might be gladdened by remembering that.
Yeah.
And I think you've already made this point, but it speaks to the idea that there's never a time when we have failed too much. There's never a time when Jesus gives up. There's never a time when he's not going to extend his hand and say, my brother, choose again. And I find a lot of inspiration from that because he's giving us an approach not only to ourselves, not to give up on ourselves, but to other people as well. I think as long as people are willing to try again, we should be willing to extend our hand to them. And so often we aren't.
Well, yeah, and I think the direct thrust of that comment on his part is if I'm always willing to try again with you, then you shouldn't give up. You should keep trying. It's like there's a thought in our mind that at some point we've maxed out our limit and we've used up all the attempts. It's like when do the wrong password, like you have three more attempts and then they lock you out, right? Um, and then we're also used to human teachers who basically have the attitude of you failed enough and we're kind of done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so if we know that Jesus is always willing to try again with us, then that gives us permission to be willing to try again ourselves.
Right. So it's not that we give up on just trying again. It's that we get better at it.
Right. And that's what this whole thing brings up for me. In the past, I would find like myself thinking, okay, I should really go for a new beginning, but it's hard and I've messed them up before. And I think what this is all adding up to is that rather than abandoning our attempts at new beginnings because we've messed so many up, we just need to get better at them. Uh, we think we should at some point just quit, but basically I think what the course is implying is that new beginnings should for us not be this occasional thing, um, but basically they should be routine rather than the exception. They should be the rule so that we do more and more and get better and better.
Right. And if you're really applying this, you're trying again throughout the day, like
Well, I think you're trying
multiple times a
again
day.
throughout the day. You're trying again, especially every day. Um, the course talks about being reborn with each relationship every day. There's a line in the text that says, with each one, each relationship, each day, be born again. So every relationship, you're basically saying it passes over. This is a new day. I'm born again to this relationship today. And as you kind of just alluded, there's a lesson in the workbook that says you treat each instant this way. It says each instant given unto God in passing, with the next one given him already, is a time of your release from sadness, pain, and even death itself. So we're meant to be, rather than I'm in my patterns, I'm kind of in the same rut, and I'll have these occasional attempts at new beginnings. We're meant to be in a new beginnings mindset. When you wake up in the morning, as you enter new situations, you know, ideally with every instant, etc.
Hmm. So what again, it's almost like a fire hose to the face of amazing ideas for the new year in the course. And of course, we could share far more than the four that we've pulled, but that just feels to me like yet another concept that if we really got it, every day really would be different. And therefore, the year would be different because we would show up differently. We would show up
Yeah.
more forgiving, more loving, more willing to try again, as Jesus is willing to try with us.
Yeah.
And so, do you want to talk any more about how we can use that attitude to approach each day?
Well, I think we should talk about, because our topic is the year, that's such a big unit of time, right? I think we should talk about, how we can, and it's the same principles that apply. If we're going to have a new beginnings mindset, those principles apply to every day, every instant, every situation, every relationship,
Every
e-
minute.
every minute, as well as every year. So what are some of the ideas that we need to have that mindset? I think first of all, we need to take on board that the past really is over. And that means all the things that were done to us. But I think underneath that, we really carry all those mistakes of ours. Somewhere inside, we're still regretting all kinds of things we did and said and thought. We need to realize that our mistakes are gone into a past that no longer exists, and they're not here in the present unless we bring them into the present.
So, this is the time where many students ask the question of, well, what if I'm in a relationship, for example, and the behaviors of the past that have so hurt me from another person are not improving and they don't even wish to improve them? So, what would you recommend for somebody who's wondering, okay, well, I get the idea that the past is over, it can touch me not, but the behavior that has so wounded me continues in the present, and I can't just keep forgiving it in the moment and living at the effect of this negative pattern. So, what would you say to that?
Well, obviously, the relevant thing is for we ourselves to turn over a new leaf, to let go of our past patterns. And in every relationship, if you feel you're being continually mistreated, you're somehow, there's a dance that you're doing together, the two of you, and you should be concerned with your side of that, whatever that is. If you leave the past behind, if you actually enter into a year where your goal is to make it a different year, and things change in you, things will change in your life. Maybe there'll be, a way forward in that relationship. Maybe there will be a way forward without that relationship. But the basis for those changes are changes inside of you.
Yeah, as is so often said, when that change occurs in you, either the other person will change as a result of that, like in response to the changes in you, or you'll be guided to leave a relationship that no longer serves either one of you when the
Yeah.
learning is complete. And
I've
so,
I've read of so many near-death experiences, for instance, where someone comes back from them, they're changed, their values are changed, and they find they just don't fit with their current spouse. And so many NDEers, at that point, go through a divorce simply because there's no longer a fit between the two of them. And the choices we make in the moment can be powerful, just like having an NDE is.
right. And that's a reinforcement of the idea that our lives are not fixed. Like the choices that we make in each moment can be truly life changing.
Right. I think we like to tell ourselves we're stuck in these ruts and there's, nothing we can do about it, as a permission to repeat the same stuff forever. But the fact is, nothing is fixed. Choice is real. And we've all probably had life-changing choices that were made in an instant, and yet everything afterwards, was changed.
Yeah, and again, it just applies to the way in which we approach our resolutions. We tend to make them, break them, and then say, "Well, nothing changes." And the reality of the matter is that we didn't change.
We didn't stick with it. Yeah. I mean, there is something, the course is very goal-oriented, and it basically believes in us setting firm goals and then staying true to them, keeping our eyes focused on whatever, helps us forward with them, and ignoring the things that draw us away and pulling ourselves back when we wander off. It's got a real goal-oriented way of moving through life, which you don't often think about as being like the spiritual way, but it's definitely the course's way. So in terms of our lives not being fixed, which I think is such an important idea, for me, it brings up this dream that Helen had, decades before the course started coming through. And she wrote it down and she titled it The Recorder. And in this dream, she comes upon this old man who's basically writing down in his ledger what everyone's doing, like everyone all the time. And then when that lifetime is over for a certain person, he hands in their tally to the proper authorities. And Helen, of course, is like wondering, well, what's her page look like? And she
We
tries to
all are.
ask him. Yeah, we're all wondering. Yeah, I'm not sure I want to know. But she finally asks him, and basically he says over and over, I've seen a person suddenly decide to do something very unexpected, something that changes the whole picture of his accounts. He's quite likely to do it up until the very last minute. And so his point was, doesn't matter what your page looks like now. There's no use speculating how it will turn out, because one choice can change it all.
That's fascinating.
Right. Well, and look at what happened in her life when she and Bill joined in a better way. One choice changed their lives and changed our lives. One
Yeah.
choice.
And you think about that in relation to our, and this is a little off topic, but think about that in relation to our special functions, the things that we come into this world to do, and how often do the choices that we make for the ego deviate us off the path from fulfilling our special function here.
Yeah, choice is a very real thing. I don't think, I mean, Jesus at one point, a couple of points said to Helen and Bill, and we've got it in the CE now, that he doesn't know what people will decide until they decide it. That's how free choice is.
Yeah, and don't kill me for going too far afield here, but I know that there are people who are watching who've been course students for years, and they're thinking, but wait a second, the course says the script is written. So how does that jive with even Jesus not knowing what choice we're going to make in the moment?
Do we really have to go there?
Yeah, of course, because I've set up. So now we have to,
Okay.
or
Okay.
Cindy's going to
Great.
get
Thank
emails
you.
from people wanting answers to that
Well,
question.
the way I've come to see that whole issue is that there's actually like two people in our heads right now. One is the person who's going through this for the first time and truly has free choice. And the other is someone who's actually at the end of the whole journey, at the end of time, who is basically having a massive life review and looking back and reviewing this situation. Now, that guy who's the one having the life review, he can't do anything different in this situation. For him, it's already passed. Okay. But for the other guy in our heads who's going through for the first time, we genuinely have free choice, and our choices are unknown to the powers that be. And it's up to us which way things go.
I love that idea and that concept that both things can be true at once. The course is famous for that. It's constantly asking us to hold these two things that seem so paradoxical at the same time. You know, how can we be at the end of the journey looking back and yet in the middle of the journey making choices that affect the end? Like, that just seems like
Yeah,
and at
I
the
know.
same time
It's
there's
uncomfortable.
yeah, it's uncomfortable, but at the same time, I think if you think about it long enough, it feels true. It feels true.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right,
So
you want to get us
more
back on the
more
new year?
on yeah. What was that topic we were talking about?
All right, so where do you want to go here with the theme of the new year? I mean, we should center back into that choice that we have between putting our faith in the reality, like God's witnesses to his love in our life, or the disasters that we have made. So is there anything else that you want to say
Well, I
about
think
that and
yeah,
how we dedicate the year to God?
I think that that part of facing the new year means deciding what's actually real in our lives. Are we going to say all of our mistakes, all of their consequences, the mess we've made of things, are we going to say that's what's real? Might as well continue it. Or are we going to say all those witnesses, and we listed so many examples that have shown up in my life, maybe I haven't paid full attention to them, maybe I haven't given them the faith they deserve. What if that's what's actually real in my life? If that's what's real, it makes sense to jump tracks and dedicate the new year to that stream of things.
Yeah, and it's again, it's the power of what we choose to see. And the choices that we make stem from what we choose to see. Do we want to see all the disasters that we've made and the effects that those have had in our lives? Because if we want to see that, we can. They're everywhere. But at the same time, what is also everywhere is those witnesses for God's love. And I know we're running out of time here, but at the same time, I just can't help but share an example from my own life in this regard. I keep mentioning, yeah, God will send a friend in your life. And that has been so true for me in so many different situations. One of which I'll say is there was somebody who I had known as a work colleague and acquaintance. He was a vendor for a marketing agency that I used to work for when I was just starting my career, and I hadn't heard from him in years. And one day I'm on a walk in my neighborhood and I get a text from him, and he says, again, completely out of the blue, "I'd like to talk. I think I need some of that Jesus advice." And so I was like, "Oh, well, okay." So we scheduled a time to talk. And as it turns out, He was going through the exact same, I mean, exact same situation that I was going through in my life, which is the ending of a marriage and all the complexities and dynamics involved in that. And the ending of a marriage can look so different to different relationships, but mine and his were so parallel. It was of God. It had to have been of God. And so we walked each other through this 2-year process where we spoke about every other day, and our situations resolved themselves in the exact same way. And then once the situations had resolved themselves, we went our separate ways. We still talk now, occasionally text and say, how you doing? Are things okay? But I cannot think about that appearance in my life without a sense of awe that
Witness to God's love.
I know God sent me a friend, and me for him. And so that feels like one example. I'm sure everyone listening or watching right now has
Right.
their own example of that, but that's just one of the most powerful in my life.
Yeah. And so we all have to decide what's more real. Is it the mess we've made of things, or is it things like that, speaking of another order, that's the true reality in our lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a divorce type situation is really apt there, because that is a disaster. I mean, that is a life, like a truly
A
significant
mess has
life
been
change.
made.
A mess has been made, and children are involved, et cetera, et cetera. And what are you putting your faith in, right?
Yeah. Right.
And if you look, God's witnesses are everywhere. That's the point.
Yeah. So I think we need to decide what's the more real thing in my life so that I can continue with that or switch over to that. And I think we need to make it kind of specific. If it's just vague, it's not going to have a lot of teeth to it. So however we devote the year to God, I think it needs to have a specific form.
So I don't want to I was going to say, I don't want to put you on the spot, but that's basically what I've been doing this whole live. But what are you doing? I know the answer to this, but I think other people would be curious to know the answer of what you're doing to dedicate the year to God. What specifically are you doing to make this part of your life in the next year?
Well, I guess the short version of that is that I'm joining with you in having a focus every day on living the day the course as the course wants us to, which involves, a fairly detailed picture of morning quiet times and hourly practice and practice in between the hour and asking for guidance and giving miracles. And our accountability is going to be not just sharing about it with each other, but also writing about it on a document um, so that we have a written record, and that keeps us accountable as well.
Yeah, and all of that extends out into the classes that we do in Course Companions, and it extends out to the circle in countless ways. So, Robert, is there anything that you want to say to wrap us up here,
Well,
or
I would
should I
just
just?
really encourage everyone to reflect on these ideas. The past is gone. You can make a new choice in the present. What's real in your life? And then I would encourage you to ask for guidance about what your specific form of dedicating the year to God would be. Like maybe you do the workbook in the course next year. Maybe there's something else. You and I started the year and did the first couple of months in the year focused on the section rules for decision, where you ask for guidance throughout every day. So hopefully, if you ask for guidance about what to do in the new year, you'll have a sense. Like we asked for guidance yesterday about an idea, and the guidance was kind of like, "No, don't do that." So hopefully, your guidance will have a sense of what is specifically right for you here at the beginning of 2021.
Yeah, and it's always fun when you ask for guidance, and in this process where you close your eyes and then you open your eyes, and then when you get the same thing, that's always really fun.
Yeah, Yeah.
Okay, so just to wrap us up here, for anyone who is not a member of our Course Companions program for students who are on the complete and annotated edition of the course, we have started over with the text and the workbook today. So this is going live on January 1st. It is not too late to join us if you want to go through the text, the workbook, or the manual for teachers and actually complete it with guides, Robert, me, Marianne Pachowski, and a reading schedule and a community of miracle-minded friends in our Facebook group and classes, weekly classes. And it's just a whole support structure that will help you as you go through your course practice this year. And if you need that, to hold yourself accountable, then along with Jesus as your accountability partner, then we hope that you will join us. And if you'd like more information on that, you can find it at coursecompanions.com. So for those of you who have joined us today for our Facebook Live, we thank you and we wish you a very happy new year, very happy 2021 and beyond. Thank you so much. Bye for now.